Pitch on the way to Garvey. Hit high to right center field. Way back. Going. In it. Gone. The Padres win it.
It's time for the 10th inning.
Gibson swings and a fly ball to deep right field. This is going to be a home run. Unbelievable.
Put me in cold. I'm ready to play today. Put me in cold. I'm ready to play today. Look at me. I can be center field.
Hello, and welcome to the 10th inning. I'm Nick Mattos, and I host a sports talk show on KSRO in Sonoma County, Sundays from 4 to 6 p.m. The name of the show is Overtime with Nick and Bob, and joining us today on the 10th inning is my co-host and my funk soul brother. Welcome to the 10th inning, Bob. How are you today?
Hey, welcome. How you doing, bro? What's going on?
We're going to talk today about the ALCS between the Cleveland Indians and the Toronto Blue Jays, which ended tonight. The Toronto Blue Jays went down 4-1, and our objective on this podcast is to break down and identify the managerial decisions and big plays that affected the outcome of the games between both those teams in this AL Championship Series. And you know, the Cleveland Indians haven't been to the World Series since 1997, and they haven't won the World Series since 1948. So this is very exciting for the town of Cleveland. And you know, you're rocking right now, Bob. They won the NBA championship there. The Cleveland Cavaliers knocked off our Warriors, and that town is just absolutely rocking. Just take away the Cleveland Browns, though, bro. Okay, we won't talk about the Browns, but I'm sure they're in heaven there, huh?
Oh, they have to be very excited. And I don't know if you watched any of the games, but the Cavaliers were out in force. They had Kevin Love, LeBron was there, Kyrie Irving. So yeah, they've embraced the situation there, and all of Ohio is behind the Cleveland Indians. So
yeah, well,
and don't forget who told you in April. Watch out for the Cleveland Indians.
You absolutely did, and you set that up on our show, Overtime with Nick and Bob. You came on in the beginning of the season. We were talking about our picks for each of the divisions, and you went out on a limb, which I thought was a limb at the time, and said that you thought the Cleveland Indians would win the American League Central Division, and you were absolutely right about that. Bob, let's talk a little bit first. Let me get the listeners brought up to speed on how these teams reached this ALCS. The Blue Jays finished the season in second place in the American League East Division. They won 89 games, 73 losses. That earned them the top wild card position. And once you know, they'd have to play the team that finished third in their division, the Baltimore Orioles. The Orioles traveled to Toronto, and in a dramatic fashion, the Blue Jays hit a 3-run home run in the bottom of the 11th inning by Edwin Encarnacion to beat the Orioles 5-2 and advance to the division series to play the Texas Rangers. And the Texas Rangers, they were the winners of that American League West division here with our Oakland A's. They had won 95 games and lost 67, the best record in the American League. And the Blue Jays, their bats were hot. And they went to Texas, won the first 2 games there, went back to Toronto and won Game 3, and basically swept right into the ALCS to play the Cleveland Indians. Now, the Indians, they had a different path. As we just mentioned, they won the championship. So they were sitting around waiting for the Boston Red Sox, and they beat the Red Sox 3-0. And I think the interesting thing about the Cleveland, Bob, is their manager, Terry Francona. Terry Francona, who managed the Boston Red Sox from 2004 he started to 2013, and he won 2 World Series there in 2004 and 2007. And after the 2012 season, they released him. He became the Cleveland Indians manager in 2013, and that first year, he became the American League Manager of the Year and took Cleveland to the playoffs. They had the best record that year, Bob, but they lost in the first round that year.
Yeah, well, Francona's a proven commodity. I don't think there's any question about the fact that Terry Francona can manage, and one of his strongest assets, one of the things that really makes Terry Francona a great manager is he's a great communicator. He really gets down, talks to his players. He's not necessarily a player's manager, but certainly on the same plane with his managers, with his players, very big on communicative skills. And I think the other thing, and I think that bore itself out this season, was he's a great handler of pitching staffs. He really knows how to get the most out of his staff, out of his bullpen. Case in point today, they bring in a kid named Ryan Merritt, who nobody ever heard of, to get to the World Series, and it plays out well for him. He had enough faith in the kid to go out. Kid's thrown 11 innings in the majors this season, to put him in Game 5 of the playoffs to go to the World Series. So I think Terry Francona gets the best out of his players, and I think that's probably one of his strongest assets.
Yeah, the players bought in. Whatever he brings to the table, they like it, and they consume it, and they're all in on it. In the beginning of the season, though, Bob, you predicted the Indians to win this division. What did you see in that team that most people didn't, Bob?
Well, one of the things that was huge for them, and I think it bore itself out today, or this whole in the whole series. Although Napoli didn't play very well in the first two series, he was huge in this last series. He had big RBIs in every game, and including the first RBI, which is always the most important. So I think the acquisition of Mike Napoli last year, they brought up Lindor. They made Lindor their shortstop. They basically, and they put Kipnis at second, basically improved what was one of the worst defenses in the American League, solidified the defense, had Corey Kluber, had Carlos Carrasco, they had Cody Allen in the pen, so they had some good pitchers, and once again, it comes down to Francona putting the right pieces together. They got some unknown players. Carlos Santana, not many people know Carlos Santana. The kid Carrera that plays in the outfield for him. So I think that the main thing was it looked like, and the other thing that I saw going into it, Kansas City and Detroit were basically the two other teams in that division. They really didn't, Kansas City didn't really add anything. Detroit went out and spent some money, but I didn't think it was money well spent. I just didn't see that they had made themselves that much better. And Cleveland also was playing very well at the end of 2015. So.
Well, that's an interesting point about Kansas City, because after they had won the World Series that last year, and they had gone to the World Series the year before where the Giants had defeated them in Game 7, I didn't see them dropping off as much as they did. And that was very surprising to me, and absolutely a great call by you. And that's why you are a plethora of information, and we love to have you on the show. So, in Game 1 there, let's talk about Game 1, because you mentioned Corey Kluber, and he was the Cy Young Award winner in 2014, and he had a great year this year. He was 18 wins and 9 losses, and he's the ace of the staff, obviously. And in Game 1, he completely shut down the Blue Jays 2-0, and it was just a complete shutdown. The Blue Jays really did not have any kind of opportunity to score any runs. And the amazing thing was that they brought in those relief pitchers. And talk about the acquisition of Andrew Miller and Coco Crisp, because I think those two players, Bob, they stood out very big in this series.
Well, they basically gave up 4 of their top prospects to the Yankees for Andrew Miller, but that's obviously money well spent. Andrew Miller faced 25 batters in the playoffs and have struck out 14. Okay? He hasn't given up an earned run. He's probably on pace to break the postseason record for innings. I think it's 18 or 19. He's already got 11. So you can guarantee that Francona's going to have him in there. But, he's just lights out. Anybody that's watched him pitch in his recent games, he's come in 6'7", throwing 95, 97, 98, just gas and just throwing it right by him. And the other thing I think that you talked about Coco Crisp. One of the things about Coco Crisp, veteran player, stabilizing influence, been in big games, played in the wild card game with the A's a couple years ago. So Coco, and also a former center fielder, not afraid to go play left field, not afraid to what's best for the team. So I think those were huge acquisitions for them, particularly Miller. Miller's going to name his price. Miller just seems to be right now unhittable, and Coco Crisp brought a very big stabilizing influence to the team. So I think they were huge. I think that only made them that much better, and it made the players around them better for veteran. And the other thing is a guy like Napoli. Napoli's been to the World Series. Napoli's a veteran player. For him to buy into Terry Francona's program and get all these kids going in the same direction. It just looked like it was going to be a good fit for me.
And it was.
And a perfect example is getting back to your analogy with Kansas City. That was one of the things that got them to the World Series the last 2 years was lights out bullpen. You get to the 6th inning, the 7th, 8th, 9th are pretty much sewed up, and that's what Cleveland's pretty much done late in the season and in this postseason. Is if he can get it, and that's what they did today with Ryan Merritt. They got to the 5th inning, and then they turned it over to the bullpen. And just a quick note on Toronto, and I think we talked about this when we talked about the wild card game. Toronto's a big home run team, big hitters. They did it so that they hit big against Baltimore. They went to Texas. They kept those hot bats going, but those bats went silent in the games against Cleveland for probably. I mean, obviously it was pitching, but we also know that hitting is. It can come and go. I mean, The Giants are a perfect example of that. You look at the Cubs right now in their situation with the Dodgers; they're not barreling up the ball at all. But I think, and I made this analogy on the show last week. They got 8 home runs and scored 22 runs against the Rangers in 3 games. They scored, 6-8 runs this whole in 5 games against Cleveland. So live by the sword, die by the sword. The big bats didn't come. And, when it counted, basically.
Well, I think, Bob, you're bringing up a good point there about the recipe to win in the playoffs. And it's good pitching, timely hitting, and solid defense. And we've seen this happen year after year to these teams that live and die on their offense. They get into the series, and if the hitters cannot perform, they're not used to grinding out games. They're used to hitting 3-run homers, and everybody on the team's grinding, and that's what happens. And that's what happened to Toronto. They ran into a team that had the recipe, good pitching, timely hitting, and good defense. And everybody on Cleveland right now is bought in. When they got Coco Crisp, he was a player that was in Oakland, and we all got to see Coco Crisp. And at the end of the season here, Coco was getting no time at all to play. There was something in his contract that had said if he was going to play a certain amount of innings, that he was going to get this a bunch of extra money. And so basically, the A's, who we know are very frugal, and they have to be, they don't draw a lot of crowds. The A's set Coco on the bench, and he was very disgruntled. He understood the situation. It's business. But the best thing for Coco was he got to go to another team, and the team was the Cleveland Indians, obviously, who are in the playoffs and now going to the World Series. And I know today Andrew Miller got voted the MVP of the ALCS, but I'm going to tell you it could have easily been Coco Crisp. He did a lot of things in the series that were team-like, okay? In the very first game, Coco sacrificed 2 times. That's only been done one other time in an American League Championship Series game. So Coco gave himself up for the team. In Game 3 on Sunday night, Toronto was mounting a furious comeback. They were down. They had the bases loaded. The MVP from last year, Josh Donaldson, came up, an ex-A player that played with Coco Crisp. Isn't that ironic? He hits a bullet to left field, and Coco Crisp makes the play of the whole series, if you ask me. He comes in and catches a ball off of his shoe tops for the 3rd out of the inning and basically saves the game. The base hit would have tied the game. At that point, Toronto could have had some momentum. It was the first game in Toronto. Obviously, we know they won Game 4. So that was a game changer right there and a series changer. And Coco Crisp today hit a home run. He's a guy that could go to the World Series and shine. He's been in this situation with the Red Sox before. He's a veteran player. He knows he's coming to the end of his time. Look for Coco Crisp to stand out in the World Series. So in that game too, Bob, again, we got a great pitching performance from Josh Tomlin. Tell us a little bit about Josh Tomlin, because I don't really think a lot of people know him. This guy is a quality starter.
Well, absolutely. And the thing about Josh Tomlin, he was actually supposed to start the 3rd game when Trevor Bauer, had his little mishap with the drone and cut his finger open. They moved Josh Tomlin into the next. They just told Josh Tomlin, "Hey, you're starting tomorrow," instead of whatever. Josh Tomlin's a good young kid, got a good live arm. Like you're saying, not a lot of people know a lot about him, but he's going to be the number 2 starter for them next year. And the other thing about the Indians that people forget, they had Carlos Carrasco, a fine pitcher. Got hit in the hand late in September, broke his hand, out for the season. So now it's one of the reasons that they had a kid named Ryan Merritt, standing by because they knew they were going to need pitching. And getting back to Coco Crisp for just a quick second, talking about the veteran leadership, okay? One of the things, and you know this, is being an ex-ball player yourself. It's easy to, the manager tells you to go up there and sacrifice, okay? How many times have we seen veteran players unable to put the bunt down? It happens all the time. Coco Crisp did it twice. Terry Francona said, I need you to go up there and sacrifice. So what did Coco Crisp do? He goes up there and sacrifices. So that speaks volumes to the veterans' ability to do what's necessary to win ball games.
Well,
and
Bob,
then, like you're saying, stabilizing outfluence in the outfield, and 2 big home runs in the series. It would be hard for me not to get on the Coco Crisp bandwagon for the World Series as well.
Yeah.
But I also think Napoli is swinging the bat very well right now, and it's hard to overlook Lindor. Lindor came from nowhere to solidify that defense and had a couple big hits, including a home run in the game. So, in the series. So.
Yeah, Bob, you brought up a good point on Lindor. I'm glad you touched on him because in the first couple of games, he was absolutely the offensive star. Now, in Game 4, Napoli had a nice big game, and the Toronto Blue Jays won that game. I think it was it Game 3? Excuse me. Game 3 is Napoli hit the home run and the Indians knocked off the Blue Jays, right, in that Game 3.
Right, correct. Yeah. The Toronto won last night with Aaron Sanchez. Yesterday with Aaron Sanchez,
That's
who's
correct.
basically their best pitcher, a young man that they wanted to control his innings. He had pitched more innings than they really wanted him to pitch. They gave him 8 days rest. They put him out there, and he pitched lights out. So but that's one of the reasons why they did that is because they expect that kid to pitch for Aaron Sanchez to be their number one starter for a long time, and they're not going to put all their marbles in, they're not going to jeopardize the young man in one game when he's got a whole future ahead of him.
Yeah.
Much like the Mets are doing with Steven Matz.
Yeah, Bob, something happened in that Game 3 that I see it's a trend now that's happening here in the playoffs, and it started when the Giants were playing the Chicago Cubs, and I'm noticing now that the managers are bringing their closers in the 7th inning. It happened in the Giants game. They brought Chapman came in for Chicago against the Giants, and then they used the closer for the Cleveland came in. Cody Allen came in the 7th inning of that Game 3. Now, I think that's a bit risky, Bob. I really do, and I don't. There are a couple of reasons that I don't like to see that happen. One is these closers are they're like creatures of habit. They like the adrenaline, and their routine is to get up in that 8th inning, start stretching. They know they're coming in to close the game if the team's winning. There's a big adrenaline rush in that 9th inning. When you ask your closer to get up in the 6th inning or the 7th inning, that's something he's not used to. So now you're asking him to get up and come in the game. The adrenaline rush is not the same, and we've seen a lot of times that backfires on teams. And sure enough, it did the game against when the Giants were playing the Cubs there, and Chapman came in the 7th inning. And this game didn't backfire. This time, Cody Allen came in, and you have Andrew Miller, and he's just as good as a closer, and he came in and finished off the game for him in Game 3. But I noticed it, same thing happened with the Dodgers. The Dodgers were playing the Washington Nationals in that Game 5. They brought in Jansen came in, and I believe it was in the 7th inning. They had him for 4 outs, and then they asked Clayton Kershaw to come in and finish it off. I really don't think that's a good recipe for your team to do it because if it can backfire. And the last point I want to make on this is that when you give the hitters of the other team extra at-bats against the closer, it can hurt them later in the series. And I'm going to specifically talk about the Dodgers. Last night, they beat the Cubs, and I don't know if you got a chance to see it, but they brought in they brought in Jansen again for a 4-out save, and they were leading 6-0. I'm wondering if that might not help the Cubs. They had an extra look at him. That might not help the Cubs if it goes into Game 6 or 7. But what's your thoughts on bringing in the closer in the 7th inning of games?
Well, just speaking to the adrenaline issue, if I'm in a playoff game, I would think that I don't need. I mean, adrenaline should be pumping if I'm in there in the 1st inning, in the 2nd inning, or in the whatever inning I'm in there. I should be ready to go. I see your point, and I think it manifests itself in what you're talking about with Kenley Jansen. The other thing about it is, so Kenley Jansen's pitching in this, getting 4-out saves. He's throwing 30 pitches a night. What's going to happen in Game 6 and Game 7? Okay, because those guys. I mean, during the season, quite frankly, it's pretty rare to go out there 2 or 3 nights in a row and throw 30 or 35 pitches. If you're a guy like Kenley Jansen, a guy like Cody Allen, even a guy like Andrew Miller. So let's see how that manifests itself in a 6 or a 7 game series when Kenley Jansen's out there and his arm's hanging down to his knee, because they're, like you're saying, it's not the normal thing that happens during the season where you would pitch 3 or 4 days in a row and be out there trying to get 5, 6 outs in a game.
Yeah.
But on the other side of that, and you and I played a million softball games together. I can tell you start counting outs about this. Once it gets down to 9 outs, once it's single digits outs and you're playing for something big, you start counting outs. And I think that's what I think that's the other part of that. We need one. We can get 2 more outs if we can get 1 more out. If we can get, you start counting outs when it gets that close, particularly when the prize is so big.
Yeah, you're exactly
those are my
right.
thoughts on that.
The last 9 outs of the game are important, but the toughest ones to get are the last 3. But another interesting move that I thought Francona did, and he's made all of his moves have been good, but I did question why he started Corey Kluber on 3 days rest there in Game 4. To me, I thought I would have preferred to give him an extra day or 2 rest and have him come and close out the game, close out the series, being his best, rather than to force him on 3 days rest. And he didn't look himself in Game 4 there, Bob.
Well, my thoughts on that are this. I would say if I'm Francona, let me see what Corey Kluber does have on 3 days rest in a situation that's not going to, it's not the 7th game. It's not the 5th game. So let's see what Corey Kluber can do on 3 days rest. It didn't work out very well. I would be surprised if they try to throw Corey Kluber on 3 days rest again, but it may come up. It may come up in the, if they're able to go to the 5th or 6th game of the World Series, or they might need Corey Kluber on short rest. But I think what Francona did is he got a look at what Corey Kluber can do on 3 days rest, and it wasn't that good. So it'll be interesting to see if they try that same strategy again. The other thing is going to happen. What's going to happen with Trevor Bauer? Is his finger going to be adequately healed? Is he going to be able to contribute in the World Series, or is it going to be like it was the other night where they had 7 pitchers in 6 innings? So I think that's the other part of that is what are they going to be able to get out of Trevor Bauer? And maybe they're going to have to go with Corey Kluber on 3 days rest. But getting back to my original point, I think Francona wanted to see what he had in terms of, and there's not very many opportunities where you get to put somebody out there on short rest where it's not, everything's on the line. And in this case, everything wasn't on the line, so it gave him kind of a little cushion, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, well, I see your point, but I would disagree with it. I think your point you're making is why he did it, but I don't think it was the right move. I really don't, because even if they would have had to go to a Game 7 in this series, he would have again had to come off of 3 days rest and pitch Game 7. So I would have thought the best strategy would have been to give him a rest and pitch him in Game 5, which would have been today. He would have had his normal 4 days rest. I thought that was – now, I don't want to second-guess Francona. He's done a fine job. Everything he's doing with the Cleveland Indians is working out. So it's not a big deal. It's not an issue right now. They're going to have time to rest him up. They've obviously already clinched the World Series appearance. They're going to sit back now and watch the Dodgers and the Cubs play each other. I think that series is going to extend itself. Tonight's a big game in that series. The Cubs don't want to go down 3-1. But let's look forward now to the World Series. Cleveland's going to go in there. You mentioned that Bauer's finger was an issue. Bob, it looked pretty bad. From what we could see, that finger had a pretty bad opening in it. I don't know if they're going to be able to count on him at all, because unless he can get some kind of a skin graft, and it's just tough. That was on his throwing finger. I don't think they should count on him, but I think what you mentioned about the kid today, this kid Ryan Merritt. Now, he's an unknown, and he surfaced, and he might be the shining star that they need to get him through Game 4 or Game 5. But I think Cleveland here hasn't gone to the World Series in a long time. I would love to see the Cubs and the Cleveland Indians in it, because no team's going to be a loser then. Anybody that wins, it's going to be great. The other team got to the World Series, although both those cities haven't won World Series. They're the longest drought in Major League Baseball. But I feel pretty confident now that Cleveland's lined up pretty well. The rest that they're going to get for this is going to be huge.
Oh, I don't think there's any question about it. I mean, like as you just pointed out, the situation with Kluber, the situation with Trevor Bauer, and for all the rest of those pitchers. I mean, Francona went through a bunch of pitchers the other night. I think it allows him to line things up. Trevor Bauer had 11 stitches in his finger. I don't know if you've ever got stitches in your finger, especially in your pitching hand. I mean, we saw he threw, 2/3 of an inning, and that was it.
Yeah.
Then we about ready to go get a blood transfusion. So I would have to agree with you in the terms of Trevor Bauer's not probably a shoe-in to have any kind of to participate in the World Series, but that certainly remains to be seen. And the other thing that happens is, as you just pointed out, you believe that this Dodger Cub series will extend itself back to Wrigley Field. Who's going to survive that series? What are they going to have left with Cleveland basically standing there waiting for them?
Yeah, that's a great point.
That will be part two of that. And it all speaks to, and I try not to boast, but I told you, look out for Cleveland in April. And now it's October, and there they are.
Well, that's why you're the plethora of information, okay? Then we have you on the show, and I have you as my co-host, okay? Because I know that brain of yours, it's solid, okay? It's very good. So, well, Cleveland's red hot, and we're gonna talk about the World Series and when it comes. And Cleveland right now, red hot. They had won 9 straight games there, Bob, before they lost that one game, and now they're won today to finish it off. So they've won 10 and 11 games. They're going to sit home. They're going to get a lot of study on both these teams. Who do you like in the Dodgers-Cubs series? Now that the Dodgers took the 2-1 lead and have the 2 games at Dodger Stadium, what's your thoughts on that series?
Well, it's hard for me to root for the Dodgers just because they're the Dodgers. Excuse me. And I'd like to believe that the Cubs still have Lackey. They still have Lester. They still have maybe another shot with Arrieta. But I don't see – they're not swinging. I mean, Rizzo's not hitting. Addison Russell hasn't had a hit yet. They seem to be able to control Bryant right now. Some other teams, mainly the team in black and orange, couldn't do that. So I look for – unless the Cubs can really get their hitting together, it's going to – I hate to say this, but it's probably going to be the Dodgers. Well,
I'm rooting for the Cubs real bad, okay, just for the same reasons that you said.
You picked the Cubs, so I know you're rooting real bad for the Cubs.
Yeah.
And as I pointed out a million times, the teams that win 103 games sometimes don't win the whole thing. So.
Yeah, well, let's look for the Cubs to win tonight, and we can draw this series out, get it back to Chicago. I think the nation would love to see the Cubs and the Indians in the World Series. I certainly don't want to see the Dodgers in there, but I want to thank my funk soul brother, Bob, for coming on the 10th inning here. And you can listen to Bob and I each Sunday from 4 to 6 p.m. on KSRO, 1350 AM, 103.5 FM on Sonoma County. Overtime with Nick and Bob. You did a good job. Thanks a lot, my funk soul brother. We're going to come back on the World Series and preview those teams and talk a little bit about the decisions and the gameplay. So look for the 10th Inning Podcast with Nick Mattos and his producer, David Perkins.